Yeah, yeah, another wireless one. You know, yeah, we've got an extra mic input, so we can put another one up there, no problem. So, yeah, shouldn't be a problem. And we've got the budget for another microphone, and so like just mount it right there. So. It's hard. Like I mean, that's why running it through the PA system is the yeah yeah yeah, and I'll show you afterwards how good it sounds because it does. Is it in the bulletin? Okay, I hadn't heard. So we haven't been announcing it, so yeah, it does say one. So we'll talk to Greg, see what Greg says. All right, well, time to get started. We are in Luke this morning. Maybe thinking about it. All right, here we go. And we're in Luke 12, verse 13. Luke 12, verse 13. So last time we talked about the leaven of the Pharisees, and we talked about, you know, the influence that just a little bit of false teaching, the little bit of badness can have on people. Specifically, the leaven of the Pharisees that Jesus talks about here is hypocrisy, the idea of being two-faced, the idea of saying one thing and doing another. And so you had these Pharisees and Jewish leaders who were saying, well, this is what you need to do to be spiritual. And then they were not practicing that. So it would be the equivalent of a church saying, we need to love our neighbor, but we weren't loving our neighbor. We were being selfish and closed off. And so then we talked about the need to acknowledge Christ before men, that we need to be willing to acknowledge Christ. We talked about blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, and that is the idea of denying the power of God. And so now we're going to pick up in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, this is Luke 12, verse 13, someone in the crowd said to him, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said to him, Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you? And he said to them, Take care, be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And he told them a parable, saying, The land of a rich man produced plentiful. And he thought to himself, What shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops? And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. Relax. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich for God. And so we have this parable of the rich fool. And it always gets interesting when we talk about money and wealth and rich and poor and those kinds of things. So the situation is this. There's a guy who comes and says, Hey, Jesus, I want you to tell my brother to give me, to divide up the inheritance, to give me what is my due. Now, The way inheritance worked back then in a lot of situations is the inheritance went to the oldest, right? And so it wasn't necessarily, a guarantee that, you were going to get something, right? And so, but this person, this rich fool, seemed to think that he was entitled to something. And so Jesus, says, who am I to make this decision, right? Now, it was not uncommon for the Jewish leadership to provide arbitration and mediation. But Jesus here is kind of taking it from the standpoint of, why are you bothering me with this, right? And so, sometimes, you go and you bring a problem that you are convinced is this huge problem to your boss, and your boss just looks at you and is like, come on, Matt, is this really that big of a deal? Well, it feels like a big deal to me. And sometimes maybe it is, and sometimes it's not, right? Or, a kid who, thinks this is the biggest thing in the world, the biggest problem in the world. Mom, what am I going to wear to school tomorrow? I don't know what to do. And then they throw a fit over what to wear to school tomorrow. Is it that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things? No. But to them in that moment, yes. And so Jesus goes on to say that take care to be on your guard against all covetousness, for life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. So that is the context for this next parable. And it's important to keep in context parable, right? As we've talked about before, that the Bible tells us that it is the love of money that is the problem. That's what Paul talks about in Timothy. And so covetousness, right, is the idea of strongly desiring, lusting after, wanting something that is not mine. And so the danger that Jesus is teaching about is the danger of covetousness, the danger of desiring something that is not yours. And so wanting something that is someone else's. And he goes on to point out that life is not about stuff. So life is not about stuff, and life is not about wanting other people's stuff to the point of covetousness, right? And so, example, right? Greg, those are some nice tennis shoes. What kind of shoes are those? Skechers. Man, those are some cool Skechers. Now, if Matt goes, those are cool Skechers, what do you like about them, Greg? Oh, they're good on my feet and arches. I can walk a long time, which I know because I wear Skechers. But if I didn't, I'd be like, okay, cool. Then I will just go take my money and buy a pair of Skechers. Cool. Thank you for the recommendation, right? That's fine, right? That's how things happen. But if I am all obsessed with that, if Greg has the limited edition pair of Skechers and I go, why does he get to have those Skechers? That's not fair. It's an attitude situation. It's a matter of the heart, coveting what someone else has, and making that to where that is our fixation. I think is maybe the good way to understand it. Covetousness is wanting something with a fixation, where that is the thing, right? I have a few collections because I'm a collector. Everybody knows I love books, and one time I went and was going through some of my more valuable books that I do have. We were getting ready to move, and I think I was looking it up for insurance purposes, and I picked up one book, and I went and go, had this book a lot of years. I wonder what this is worth. Oh, wow! This book that I paid $50 for is worth $300. And it's like, cool, didn't know that. I'm going to just wrap this up and put this away. Now, did I buy the book because it was going to be a valuable book? No, I bought the book because I just wanted the book. And when I bought it, I paid what I thought was a fair price at the time for it. But we can have this idea of something so much that we neglect other things. And that is the thing that Jesus is trying to teach them to not do. Because when you put money or possessions as your focus, that means God has to be in the back seat, right? Any thoughts or comments up until this point, Tommy? Yeah. It was the motivation for the bigger barn. Yeah. Greg?
I've held many things in my hand, and they're all gone
Yeah.
or going. But those things that I've given over to the Lord are put away from me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? Paul talks about that we're to not lay up our treasures, Jesus talks about to not lay up our treasures here, right, that our treasures are in heaven. But back to what Tommy was saying, when you go into that parable and look at it, he starts telling this parable that there was a rich man who had a land that produced plenty, and he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build bigger barns to store my crops. And so with the idea being, I'm going to do this, and then I'm just going to quit. I'm done. I'm going to build it, done, no more. And he says, so you have ample goods, this is verse 19, laid up for many years, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. And he was making this barn, this bigger barn, in order to basically, he's like, oh, I'm going to just quit working. No more worry. And that's the problem. It wasn't, like Tommy said, it wasn't that he built a bigger barn. It was that he was going to forego his responsibilities in society. That his responsibilities as a landowner, right? So let's play this out in our head, right? If he builds, he harvests, he's not doing all this harvesting by himself, right? Somebody else has to work for him. Well, if he is needing to have barns, right, to store his harvest, then odds are good that he has multiple people. And back then, it wasn't just that you harvest it and you're done. Generally, back then, if you were a farmer, you were in charge of the entire operation from start to finish, right? So you had planting and tending and harvesting, and then you had processing, and then you might have distribution, right? So you would need a whole household or employees to do that. Well, if I spend 1 year and do all that work, do I need planters and harvesters and processors and all those things afterwards? No, I don't. And so he would have been foregoing his responsibility as a landowner, his responsibility as a businessman, his responsibility in the community, right? And because this is a Jewish man, who were the people he would have been hiring? His family, his brothers, cousins, his kinsmen, his neighbors. And so he would have been falling down on his job in the community to provide for his brothers and sisters. And so that's a problem. The problem was not his success. The problem was not the accumulation of a successful harvest, or to even look at it another way, the problem was not the financial success that it brought. The problem was his attitude towards that success, and that, I shouldn't have to work anymore. And so I'm going to basically shirk my responsibilities. Any thoughts, Tommy? No, you're fine. Mark was ready to go on it. I went through 3. Uh-huh. Right. And so let's talk about, let's tease this out a little bit. I mean, I have no problem talking about this. So retirement is a new concept. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Retirement really is the last 100 years or so, retirement has become a thing, right? Um, and where did retirement come from? Other than like the Great Depression and things like that. Retirement came from us needing to figure out a way for people when they get of a certain age who can't do the work that they used to do when they were younger. Okay, well, what was the Jewish retirement system? You worked until you couldn't work, and then what? Family took care of you, right? And so that was the Jewish system of retirement. Now we have historical records of things like pensions and things like that go back long ways, hundreds, thousands of years. So there is this idea of a payment system that has existed in antiquity. So it's not a brand new concept, but as we think about retirement, but also it's a state of mind, right? So this guy was going to do nothing and just relax, eat, drink, and be merry, and just kind of exist. Well, God didn't make us to just exist. He made us for a purpose, right? First and greatest command is to love God. Second, like unto it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And so I would think that in order to fulfill those commandments, you have to look at your life and go, okay, what can I do? There's nothing wrong with making money, right? Some people are blessed by God to make money. Like that is their gift. They have that Midas touch. Everything they touch seems to turn to gold. I've got a couple of buddies that the deals they get on stuff, I don't understand how. Like I have a buddy who got a truck. It was like a $15,000 truck. He got it for $4,000 because the guy was like, oh, there's an electrical issue. And he took it, and within 30 minutes he had fixed it, and he got a $15,000 truck for $4,000 or $5,000. And so some people don't like that. And so, but it goes back to where your priorities are, right? And so if you understand that the money you have, you are just being a steward of, then your heart's in the right place, right? You are a steward of this money. Did you have to work for it? Yeah, but you can't take it with you when you go, right? This isn't like the Egyptians thought where you just take all your stuff with you into the afterlife. That isn't it, right? There is no money exchange for dollars to heavenly dollars. That's not how that works. And so, the Bible is clear there's nothing wrong with being wealthy. There's nothing wrong with making money. But it is the love of the money, and it is those things. And so, where does retirement fit in? Well, what is retirement? Well, retirement is just an investment account, really. It's taking money and waiting for it to become more money, right? You earned it. You're just deferring your compensation, right? And so but the question becomes, what do you do with your free time once you don't have to work a 9 to 5? Like once you don't have to work a job, what do you do? Find a travel.
You do those things that you couldn't do between 7 and 4 or 9 to 5.
Sure. And exactly, you do the things that you've been putting off. And so, but I would suggest that some of those things that you may have been putting off is work for the Lord, right? Now, you were always working for the Lord, right? But like you suddenly had more free time. So you should be able to put a percentage of that free time in working for the Lord because you now have that free time. Does that mean you can't travel? No, that doesn't mean you can't travel. Does it mean that you can't go spend time in your garden? No, it doesn't mean that you can't spend time in your garden. Does it mean you can't spoil your grandkids right? No, it doesn't mean you can't spoil your grandkids right. I know you're worried about that, Tommy. So, but all it means is that you now have taken time you invested on 30 years ago to trade it for time later in your life. Because there's nothing wrong with somebody who works until their 70s or their 80s. I love, one of my guilty pleasures is watching business videos from Japan. There's a guy who goes around and he does like day in the life, kind of undercover boss kind of thing, but they know it. And the number of people in Japan who work into their 80s and 90s is impressive. There was a guy who built a pizza shop next to his house. And he started it when he was 60, built it for 10 years because he paid as he went, and opened a pizza shop at 70. And it's not like it's a pizza shop and it is brick fire pizza, and he is just him and his wife and their one friend just all day, every day. They're all in their 70s, and that's what they do. People wait 2.5 hours to come get this guy's pizza, right? And I'm just like, that's so cool. I hope I'm going to do that when I'm in my 70s. You know, so it's a matter of perspective, but ultimately it comes down to your attitude. You know, they didn't have investment accounts and IRAs and 401ks, but it goes back to where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. And so this guy who asked this question of Jesus, his heart is focused inwardly. His heart is focused on himself. You know, Melanie Tidwell, who was a member in Grove City when I preached down there, loved her dearly. She used her retirement. She would go volunteer at the food bank, at the actual food banks, like in our case, the one in Akron. But she used it to share the gospel and plant seeds. And so, and her rationale is, what are they going to do? Just fire me? I'm a volunteer, you know? And so, and then they didn't care because, you know, and so she would talk to them about the Bible and this, that, and the other. And she would every now and again slip tracts. She was a tract kind of person, Greg. And so she would give tracts to them and all this kind of stuff. And she did that for many, many years, and was very happy and successful. And so when we started our food pantry program at the church, she was instrumental in taking the skills that she had just been doing because she wanted to serve in the community for the Lord and translated them into a ministry that the church got involved in. It was really cool. And so, again, it goes back to where your heart is, where your focus is. That's what you need to be thinking about, because the reality is none of us are promised tomorrow, and that's what the end of the parable is about, right? Verse 20, right? God says to him, fool. Now, let's stop right there, okay? Fool, right, has a much more significant meaning back then than it does today. We call it foolish. They're a fool, right? You know, like I said, Mr. T kind of watered that down for us, right? I pity the fool, right? But the actual idea of fool is a big insult, all right? So imagine this rich guy thinking he's got it all figured out. God calls you a fool. Like, I want us to get the gravity of the situation. And so God says, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God. And I think that's the big key, Tommy. They're not rich toward God. And, yeah.
There was a little Facebook outlet, I looked at it the other night. It said, the only reason I want to be rich is this. The gentleman standing behind people in line at the grocery store, he's just taking his car and going.
Paying for the groceries. Oh, that's cool.
Most of the people that did that to were elderly, struggling to look at what happened up to them. So he just walks around, and it says, the only reason I want to be rich is this. What a wonderful thing to concept, because that's what you should be able to do. Alleviate. God didn't just set can't convert, so we don't bother with it. That's easy.
Yeah.
That's actually a problem. But, it doesn't matter if you convert it or not. Somebody, if you're poor, would be very beneficial where I am in a situation.
Very familiar with the concept.
All this, the kindness that people show, they leave it. Realize that there is good people.
Mm-hmm.
So we have responsibility. Do more than we probably are.
Mm-hmm. 100%. 100%. And, it comes down to we have, so part of our job, and maybe we don't think about it enough, like Tommy's saying, is we have to get people through this world so they can go to heaven, right? You got to survive now to get there. And some days that's hard, right? And so, but the two biggest tools that God has given us is time and money, right? Time and money. And, and I'm going to use an example, and I don't know that he is a Christian or not, but you decide which is the better, which was the more Christian, okay? So they decided to build Houston where it is. It was built where it is. And the problem with Houston is below sea level. So it is below sea level. You know why that's a problem? Is because sometimes the sea gets above sea level. And where does water go? To the lowest point. And so Sarah grew up with lots of hurricanes and stuff like that. And they had a pretty big hurricane come through a few years ago. I forget which one it was, Harvey, Ike, one of them. And people needed somewhere to go, right? And so an old Coliseum many, many years ago was bought and turned into a church, right? And so we're to imagine the Coliseum is now a church. Think how big those facilities are, okay? And now you have heard of the preacher of this church. He's a fellow by the name of Joel Osteen. And they went, hey, can you please house these people who have nowhere to go? And the answer was, no, we just redid the carpets. Now, there's another guy in Houston. His name is Mattress Max. Okay? I want you to picture all of the cheesy, low-budget commercials that you have seen in your life for cars or whatever, and that's Mattress Max. He's discount furniture, those kinds of things, but very, very successful. So what did he do? He took all of his furniture stores, he opened up the doors, he says, here, you go sleep on that couch, you go sleep on that bed, y'all sleep over there, you sleep over there, you give me a little bit of time and I will get some food in here for you folks. And that's what he did. And so he made all of his facilities, all of his stores, all of the bedding, all of that available to those people who were in need. Now, which of those two loved their neighbor? Right? And now that's a big example, right? And so, but there's lots of ways to love your neighbor. But at the end of the day, we've been given the resources we've been given in life, be it time or money, and we use it to the best of our abilities. All right? You say, well, but Matt, I don't have a lot of money. Okay, fine. Do you have time? No, Matt, I don't have a lot of time. Okay. So the question is then, how do you use the time and money that you have better? Right? Got to be at work 8 hours a day. Gotcha. How can you be a light and plant seeds in those 8 hours? Maybe you can't openly talk about, your faith in your workplace. Well, you could do it anyway and see what happens. I was shocked at the number of people in government that talk about their faith in like the city government, right? Like I was not expecting that. And so that was cool. But you can also just tell people the truth. And when they ask you where you got that from, you can tell them, right? And so But there are lots of opportunities, and it's about just making use of the opportunities that God has given you, but it goes back to this principle of the one who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich toward God. So if God is in your life, He permeates your life, He is in all aspects of your life, you are going to be rich in God. All right? Now, we know what it means to be rich, right? We can all imagine, right? You know, we remember lifestyles of the rich and famous. We know all, we know what the fancy car brands are. We know what a nice house looks like. What does it mean? What would someone look like who is rich in God, do you think? What does that look like, do you think? Generous? Consider. All right. A servant of God. All right. Do what? Should have a smile on their face. All right. Do you think a person who is rich in God is a worried person? Do you think a person who is rich in God, I'm going to say this, is always stressed? I don't think so. We all have stress. Stress happens, right? We're studying David on Sunday night. It's like, I am sure that when Saul was throwing those spears at him, he was stressed, right? When David's fleeing from Saul and they've got nothing to eat, I'm sure he was stressed. But it's not a lifestyle of stress. He knows that it's going to all work out. So smile, generosity, servant, maybe not a ton of stress. What else is somebody who's rich in God? Prayerful. What about confidence? I think someone rich in God is confident. I think they are, right? And if you stop and think about it, right? Have you ever met a rich person, like an actual rich person who didn't have a certain level of confidence? Right? Having money, like knowing that you have got a certain amount in your bank account gives you a certain level of confidence in how you go to things, right? So you go to the grocery store, you're not worried when I swipe my card, is there going to be enough, right? You're not digging through the couch for nickels to put enough gas in the car, right? You go into something, you go into a medical emergency, you're not too worried about it because yes, you have insurance, but you also have money to back it up. And so there's a certain level of confidence. So then confidence in God, that God is going to help get you through this situation, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about that today in the sermon. But any other ways that you think about somebody being rich in God? Yeah. So, I think that's in James. So, and blessed is a relative term, right? So, but the reality is that, and Paul talks about it elsewhere, but right, those who put their trust in God will not be put to shame, right? And so, it's going to work out. You don't know how it's going to work out, but it's going to work out because God's involved. You got to trust that God's going to work it out. What that looks like, we don't know. But the thing is, right, our job is just to survive this world. That's it. Just to survive this world. Because we don't take our house with us, we don't take our car with us, we don't even really take our family with us unless they obey the gospel, right? But when we pass away, we're not waiting at heaven's gate for our family because we're going to be with God. Now, when they get there, Lord willing, we're going to be excited to see them, be like, hey, come on, we're going to go, worship God together, and it's going to be a cool thing. But we leave this world and everything with it, all the pain, all the heartache, all the struggle. All we got to do is get through and help other people get through. And that's what God has called us to do. Now, getting through it, there's a lot to that, right? Like it's an easy principle, a hard practice, right? Because you've got to take care of your needs, your fundamental needs as a human being, right? You've got to overcome the devil because the devil is is trying to get you to fall down and mess up and swerve out of the way and miss the mark. So it's not easy, but it really comes back to just one real job, which is to follow God, trust God, and love our neighbor as ourselves. So it really does come back to that. It's amazing. Other thoughts? Sometimes it's easier said than done, but it should maybe be a comfort to us that this has been a problem. Like having the right priorities, being focused on the right thing. It was a problem in the first century, it's a problem today. And so it's not a problem that just showed up for our generation or your generation or whatever. It's been a problem. And so, interestingly enough, so Jesus talks about the parable of the rich fool, which is, don't worry, don't be selfish or covetousness, and focus God, put your treasure in God. And then it goes, well, how am I going to live? Right? Well, that's what he talks about in the very next section. He says to his disciples, therefore I tell you, all right, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. All right? Anytime you see therefore in Scripture, it's like, I told you this, now I'm telling you this. So all of this discussion about not being covetous, about putting God first, he's like, I said all this, and I'll tell you this. Don't be anxious. Don't worry about your life, what you will eat, not about your body, what you will put on. Now, we've talked about this before, the idea of anxiousness and anxiety, right? This is different than like the clinical anxiety, okay? These are two different things. Anxious here could be like worried, right? And so there's a level where worry becomes anxiety is an obsessive, debilitating level, right? I'm speaking from experience on this one, right? Worry is a healthy, what's going to happen, right? You're getting to the end of the month, you're going, there does not seem to be enough zeros in that bank account to cover all the things, is that worth worrying about? Yes. And so, but if you get worried about it to the point in which it prevents you from living, that's a problem. And that's a medical problem, right? And so, but Jesus here is saying, look, don't worry about what you will eat, nor about your body or what you will put on, right? So what he's saying is, look, guys, you're going to get food. You're going to get clothes. It's going to be okay, right? I'm going to talk about being poor. There were times for me growing up when I didn't necessarily have the best food, right? That's one of the challenges of economic instability is you don't have access to good food. But hey, when you're hungry, mac and cheese is mac and cheese. That's all I'm saying. You got some hot dogs put up in that thing, right? And so, but I had food, right? Now, sometimes you don't have food. Some people are in more dire straits than that. And so, but for me, like I was, didn't always know sometimes where my next meal was coming or if there'd be good food in the fridge. So, but it always worked out. It always worked out. I look at, times in Sarah and our marriage where like we didn't have a lot of money and I was worried about it and it worked out. Sometimes it took some creative arithmetic, we got to pay bills in a certain order to make it work, but we made it work. It always worked out. And so Jesus tells the disciples, don't be anxious what you will eat or what you put on, for your life or for life is more than food, the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens that neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour power to his span of life. Now, he's not telling them just be a bump on a pickle. He's not telling them to do nothing, right? Not work. He's saying, look, it's going to work out. You do what you're supposed to do, it will work out somehow. We just don't know the how. And I think maybe that's where we get, it's where I sometimes get caught up, is I like knowing the how. I have a very analytical brain. I like thinking through things. I like having plans, and backup plans, right? I like having all of that in place. And so for me to just be told, it's going to be fine, don't worry about it. But that's my job. That's what my brain tells me to do, is worry about it. But what Jesus says here is don't worry about it. You're going to get food. You will find food. It'll work out. As long as you are doing the things that you are supposed to do, it's all going to work out eventually. And you go back and you think, well, what are we supposed to do? Well, we love God. We love our neighbor as ourselves, right? But there are other things, right? We're supposed to work, earn a living. We're supposed to, what? Take care of our families. We're supposed to do all of those things. And so, we're supposed to fulfill the responsibilities that God has given us to do. And as long as we're doing that, everything else is going to work out one way or another, right? This is a fun one. No one's bankruptcy prevented them from going to heaven. Do you realize that? No one's bankruptcy prevented them from going to heaven. You know what did? Their lack of obedience to God, right? You can be dirt floor poor and go to heaven. You can be a multimillionaire and go to heaven, right? Because it's not about how much money you make. It's not about the stuff that you have. It's about, is God your treasure? Is God what is most important in your life? And if the answer is yes, then everything else just kind of works itself out one way or another. It may not work its way out in the way you would prefer, but it works itself out. And so especially when it comes to these fundamentals, right? When Sarah and I were first newlyweds, we didn't always have two nickels to rub together. And the church had a food pantry, and we would go and help. And the number of times Mike Weir, who kind of ran things, we'd get done, and he'd say, okay, this box is for you. What do you mean? He said, go put it in your car. I'm not repeating myself. Go put this in your car. And he would give us, meat and stuff like that we couldn't, $30 a meat when you're young and married that's big, and so $30 a meat when you're old and married is big, buys a little less now, but it was great, and sometimes we had to get creative in how we cooked, some of that stuff, but we had food, and I was very thankful. Any thoughts, questions, or comments? All right, well, we'll stop there and we'll pick up in 2 weeks. We'll pick up next month with that, because we've got our gospel weekend next week, and then I'm out of town the week after to go preaching Stockton, but Mark is going to teach the Bible class, so we're very thankful for Mark for stepping up for that. So we got a couple of weeks off from this, but next week we're going to be talking about questions people ask. So the whole theme of the weekend, right, is planting seeds. And we've got some great stuff on Saturday with Woody and Kyle, and then we've got great stuff on Sunday. And so everything is about planting seeds next weekend. So looking forward to it. And with that, we are dismissed.